This is a very special Best of 2017 episode of the All Things Risk podcast. Welcome and welcome back to another episode of the All Things Risk podcast, and Happy New Year! My name is Ben Catania. I'm your host. This is my show. Normally, I do long-form conversations with some great guests, and I use the lenses of risk, uncertainty, and randomness to cover all sorts of topics. This episode, however, is a little bit different. It's our second annual Best of episodes in which I select some of my and some of your favorite excerpts from 2017. It's a way of saying thank you for listening and following the show, and it's also a way of perhaps providing those of you who are new to the show a little bit of a teaser or a taster of some of the great conversations that we've had in the past year. I must say, however, that it wasn't easy to choose the clips that made it into the show. Quite the contrary. And that also doesn't mean that those clips that didn't make it, or those episodes that didn't make it, are somehow lesser. In fact, one of the things I've come to realize doing the show is that in any long form conversation, different people take away different things. Nonetheless, these were clips that somehow stuck with me. And if you are a regular listener to the show, you know that we have big picture conversations at one end of the spectrum where we have guests that cover things like geopolitics, climate change, the global economy, the big risks of our time. And at the other end, we cover things like individual decision-making and risk-taking, resilience, and similar themes with the likes of adventurers, entrepreneurs, and so on. So in putting this episode together, I thought I'd start with the big picture first and work our way to the other end of the spectrum. So let's get things going with an interesting and counterintuitive view about Russia and Vladimir Putin from my guest, Tim Stanley. This was from episode 41.
Putin's vision, I think, has always been to have respect restored to Russia, broadly speaking. And I think he's managed to do that on his own terms. Right. And I think that's been important for him. And I think, to the extent that a leader reflects the interests and concerns of their people, then I think he's been quite successful in that. I think there is a sense that, Russia's back up off its knees, that it is a country that needs to be taken seriously, that its worldview, its civilization, Russia likes to think of itself as a civilization, is very different from the West, and proud to be so, and is not going to try and sort of become just like another Western or sort of liberal European country. That's not what most Russians are interested in. So I would say that. I would say also, given the size of the country, and I know there are other big countries out there, Canada, the US, or whatever, it's not easy to manage a country this size. And I think, there probably is a sort of deep-seated concern that, okay, if we start letting regions do their own thing or giving them too much latitude to make decisions, that's the start of a slippery slope to independence movements or greater autonomy, and potentially, ultimately, the breakup of the country. Which again is something I think most people don't want to see, for all sorts of strategic, historical, cultural reasons. Sure.
Well, I suppose is it because perhaps of those historical and cultural reasons. Is that a sort of a pervasive fear that that dominates the political debate or people's thinking in places like Moscow?
I think it's implicit. I don't think it's explicit. People don't talk about it a lot. But, there is a kind of existential concern about the sort of 1.6 billion Chinese on one side of an artificial line or a river, and then, absolutely sparsely populated, rich sort of virgin forests, lands and water, and all sorts of natural resources on the other side. And you do occasionally see stories where a couple of governors, I think, out in the Far East have introduced legislation allowing long-term leases by Chinese companies. And that has sparked a huge amount of debate locally about this is the thin end of the wedge, effectively. And once these people arrive, they will never go home. There's definitely a sort of a nationalist and a sort of nasty, if you like, ethical tinge to that. But I think it is part of that deep-seated concern that, we've got this enormous country and we're very, very thinly populated. It'd be very difficult to defend if a concerted attempt were made to sort of declare UDI or to invade or whatever it may be. So I think that's deep in the psyche, but it's definitely there.
It makes sense when you look at the history. On both the on all the borders, right? So it certainly there's certainly an element of historical validity to it, and it's important to understand that.
They've lost one empire is the way they would think about it. The Soviet Union collapsed. The Soviet Union was an artificial construct, but it brought an awful lot of sort of building, infrastructure, education, healthcare across vast areas of sort of Central Asia and European Russia as well.
Yes.
So it wasn't all a force for bad that I think we see it as now from the West.
Well, I suppose. And the flip side of that is that there's a whole bunch of potentially I would have thought some irredentism around reclaiming territories that are quote unquote ours. Crimea obviously being the chief example, but I presume there are others, and that that I suppose that sentiment. Whether it comes from the politicians, from Putin, or the populace, creates a huge amount of instability in a number of regions.
So I think actually the Crimea is the exception that proves the rule there.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, because look, there is clearly a sort of a kind of neo-McCarthyite sort of thing going on in the West right now about the Russians are coming, are coming. They're sort of changing our elections. They're about to invade the Baltics and Poland. I think 99% of that is hype. I really do. There is no reason why Russia would want to invade the Baltics or Poland. It's been a bit of a relief, I think, in many ways for Russia to sort of step back from that part of the world where they were hated. Let's be honest, really not respected and disliked, seen as invaders, occupiers, bullies, and there are historical reasons why that is so. To be fair, but the idea that Russia's itching to sort of move back into the Baltics is madness. I think it's a complete fallacy, and I think it benefits certain actors in the West more than it reflects any kind of Russian reality.
Right.
I don't think I think the sort of the independence of Central Asian states that's a given now. I don't think there's any great desire to sort of. There may be the sort of the economic and the Eurasian trade area, a sort of idea to create a common economic space that would include Belarusia and in Kazakhstan and other parts. But I think that's in contrast to the EU and NATO. I don't think that's an empire building project by any stretch of the imagination.
What's your take on Russia-U.S. relations, given President Trump? What's your view on where that and who knows, right? Is the answer? But
it is. That's the answer to anything involving Trump. I think.
Yeah.
So look, when I think there was genuine relief when Clinton was not elected president. Clinton was seen as part of the problem. And the people who surrounded her were seen as part of the problem. So
why is that?
It's really interesting. The Soviets always said it was much easier doing business with the Republicans than with the Democrats. I think the Democrats are seen as more inflexible, more ideological, more sort of shrill in terms of expectations, or this is the way we want you to behave, raising awkward issues like human rights and all these other things. And whereas I think the Republicans have always been seen as more flexible, more transactional, more willing to focus on areas of commonality rather than sort of being scolding partners and saying we want you to do this, we want you to do that. So. And certainly, when she was Secretary of State, she did no favors. A lot of her rhetoric, and during the campaign, her rhetoric was incredibly anti-Russian. So I think there was a huge relief when she was not elected. I think a lot of these stories about Trump's sort of Russian influence and backers and does the KGB or the FSB have sort of have dirt on him, I think a lot of that is utter nonsense. I think he has made a few statements saying, look, this is crazy. It is the biggest country in the world. We do have areas of commonality where we have common interests. We need to focus on those, not focus on the differences. So I think there is going to be a more pragmatic approach to the relationship. That said, I still think there's a bit of nervousness in the Kremlin. Yes. Because no one really knows. Yes. The guy is quite volatile.
Yes.
And he says one thing today, and then he tweets something else late at night, and then says something completely different at the press conference the next day. Yes. So, that's not the Russians play a long game. They're strategic thinkers. They're chess players, right? They don't. They will be thinking several moves ahead. And this is why I think in the telephone call that took place between them over the weekend, I think I'm right in saying there was no mention of sanctions. It just wasn't an issue for discussion. They focused on areas where they could cooperate. And in the Russian, from the Kremlin's point of view, sanctions is not their issue. It's something that they're not going to go begging, saying, please remove sanctions, please remove sanctions. That's something that the West needs to move on, not Russia. So I think I wouldn't even say cautiously optimistic, but I think there is an expectation that the relationship will improve. To be fair, it couldn't have got much worse.
Our next clip comes from episode 51, which was my conversation with former economic hitman and New York Times bestselling author John Perkins. We were talking about sustainability, corporate responsibility, and making change happen. What do you make of things like corporate social responsibility and sustainability? Most of the major corporates have declarations to that effect and have programs and things of that nature. Has that made any difference?
Yes, that's our hope. That's and I have great hope. And I'm invited to speak at a lot of corporate summits and conferences and the corporate executives. It's amazing to me. Sometimes I ask the organizers, like, why would you want a guy who writes the kind of books I do to talk about this? And the response I get is that, well, our people are smart. They know the system isn't working, and they want to know what to do about it. And when I meet with some of these executives privately, what I hear over and over from people that we think of as very powerful, and they are within their certain sphere, but they'll tell me, I get kids, I get grandchildren, I'm scared, I'm worried about the death economy we're creating, that we're ravaging the resources that our future depends on. We're destroying our environment. I'm concerned about that. But I know, and I'm concerned that we're not paying our workers in Indonesia where they're living wages, that we're exploiting people. But I know that if I change things, and in the short term, we're likely to lose 0.5% of market share. If that happens, my main stockholders will probably fire me and replace me with someone who only cares about market share. So I will have failed in many ways. So they'll say, I need your help. Go out and talk to everybody that Ben's got on this program. Talk to everybody you possibly can. Talk to the consumers and tell them they've got to pressure our corporation to do the right thing. Have them send emails, Facebook postings. If I get 100,000 emails that say, hey, you've got to pay your workers in Indonesia a fair salary. I love your product. I'm not going to buy it anymore unless you pay your workers a fair living wage, or clean up the environment, or stop polluting the environment, or whatever the issue is. If I've got 100,000 of these emails, I can take those to our top stockholders and say, hey, these are our customers. We've got to listen. And they'll cite so many corporations then that have gone out of existence because they didn't listen. Companies, like Walmart, Walmart, and Woolworths, like Woolworths, and Bear Stearns, and Sears and Roebuck, and A&P, Atlantic and Pacific stores, and Commodore Computers. This is so many companies that are no longer in existence because they didn't listen to their customers or they made bad management decisions.
Possibly United Airlines to bring in a very recent set of developments.
That certainly happened to Eastern Airlines,
right?
And yes, and it could happen to United also. We'll see.
Yes, I came across something very interesting.
Polaroid, Kodak,
Kodak, absolutely.
Xerox, you can just name so many of them, and these executives are aware of this. That they've got to keep up with things. They've got to listen to their customers. So
yes.
I really think that although at this point the polling places where we elect our officials is not very democratic anymore because the big corporations have such strong control over it through campaign financing and so forth. But the marketplace is a democracy if we will just use it as such. And we've had huge successes in the past with getting rid of apartheid in South Africa, cleaning up polluted rivers, getting corporations to open the doors wider to women and minorities. We've had huge consumer movements that have been extremely successful, and today it's easier than ever with the internet.
You touched on a number of things here that are I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on. I don't think that we have this sort of necessarily a massive or a massive conspiracy where you've got a small number of people sitting at the top of the pyramid figuring out how to screw everyone in the world. But we've created, or we have a structural problem where we have incentives. Companies are incentivized in a very short-term way, and CEOs are incentivized in a very short-term way. Some are, they can, like big banks, they can kind of play with other people's money, and they still, you still get a bonus. And if everything goes wrong, it's someone else's money. So we have these sort of structural incentives that that perpetuate this and make it worse. But what you're talking about is ways in which we can use the levers of how the system works through consumer activism and things like this to try and influence some level of change, which is we've had historical examples, as you say, apartheid being one of them, but sometimes it just feels so entrenched, the way in which we're, trying to hit earnings every quarter, and if we're basically kicking things kicking the can down the road. How do you get to a CEO who's trying to, who wants to be, deliver profits for his company and has a sort of cognitive dissonance? How do you get inside that psyche?
Well, I think you start with the assumption that a lot of these CEOs realize that there's a serious flaw in the system today, that they realize that pollution is outrageous, that climate change is happening, and that they have to take some responsibility for it. And those that don't, they're the sociopaths out there, but they will do whatever they think it is to be successful. Right now, we've defined success as maximizing profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. The edict that was made by Milton Friedman when he won the Nobel Prize in 1976 and been with us ever since. But we need to turn that around and say, no. Success is about serving the public. It's about giving a decent rate of return to your investors and investing in things that will create a life economy, investing in things that will clean up pollution, that will regenerate destroyed environments, that will create new technologies that don't require digging up the earth anymore, that recycle, that use the sun, that use the air in ways we haven't even conceived of yet, technologies that will take us to new levels in communications and transportation and energy and banking and everything else. There's a huge opportunity out here. But and a lot of executives are looking at that, but again, they're afraid to rock the boat because they're afraid they'll lose their jobs. And for them, it isn't maybe just about losing a huge salary. It's also about realizing that the person who replaces them will not care about any of these things. They won't be able to. And so it's really up to us, your listeners, to all of us, to get out there and push, and if every one of your listeners picks a corporation. I don't care what the corporation is, Shell, Exxon, Walmart, Nike, Monsanto, and sends an email once a week to that company, and also sends that email to everybody on your listeners' social networking circles, all their Facebook and Twitter and email people, and ask them to send it to all of theirs, and ask them all to send it to this company, demanding change and being nice about it, saying, hey, I want to help you be more successful. We're moving into a new era. I'm not going to buy your products anymore. In the case of Monsanto, I'm not going to buy any products that come from anything that you've touched until you stop producing seeds that require huge amounts of chemical fertilizers and so toxic this and that. That's the way to make change happen. And I think, frankly, one of the fascinating things in the United States that's happening right now is Donald Trump's presidency is stirring the pot. People who were lethargic for the last 8 years under Obama now are waking up, and they're getting out there, and they're demanding change. They're being heard. There's a huge amount of activity now because of a reaction against Trump, and I think that's a good thing that people are waking up. I think it's unfortunate that we didn't wake up more under Obama and that we didn't push harder for real significant change and improvements. But during all these years, since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 91, I mean, the United States, in conjunction with Canada and England and the European nations, we could have done amazing things in the world. We didn't.
Our next two clips come from two episodes about transhumanism. First is with Ford Fischer, and next is with Michelle Battle Fisher. The two individuals are unrelated, but they are working on the same documentary called Transhuman, a short version of which is out now. First, I spoke with Ford Fischer about CRISPR or gene editing. Can you explain CRISPR?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because there's actually two distinct uses for the word CRISPR. One is that there actually is a company called CRISPR Therapeutics, and that company uses what is called CRISPR technology, and CRISPR technology is also being utilized and experimented with other companies. So it's always worth, when talking about CRISPR, it's always worth defining, are we talking about the company of CRISPR, or are we, CRISPR Inc., or are we talking about the actual just the technology? So CRISPR is, and I had to look this up, this isn't from memory, clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. And that probably is meaningless to anybody who doesn't actually study biology. But essentially what CRISPR technology is a tech that allows, when DNA splits, when cells split, and thus the DNA process, as we kind of learned about in maybe 8th grade science, the DNA splits, and then, it's in two halves. Every, there's only 4 different chemicals in the DNA, and each one is matched with a different one. They're paired up, so the DNA splits in half, and then it knows what to add based on the half that it already has. And then that's how we grow. That's how our cells grow and duplicate. CRISPR is a technology that would allow people to digitally edit DNA in its process of splitting. So this would allow somebody to edit a living cell's DNA at the point of replication. In practice, what this means is that a new organism, or an organism that is sort of rapidly growing, could be edited. So at this point, it has not really been experimented on humans, to our knowledge, although we also don't know. China actually has done a lot of, is kind of leading on experiments with this, and it's not entirely clear what exactly they've done so far. But in mice, they have successfully managed to edit the DNA of a mouse to make the mouse baby have DNA that is different than the DNA of its two parent mouses. And so CRISPR, the company, CRISPR Inc., CRISPR Therapeutics Inc., their goal, what they say, is that they're trying to use gene edit, trying to basically use it for the purpose of disease prevention or curing. That cancer essentially occurs when a cell has messed up DNA that causes it to replicate uncontrollably. If you could if you could use CRISPR technology, you could tell the cell stop being a cancer cell, right? Duplicate as normal cells, or you could flatly edit a fetus's DNA so that they don't have a predisposition to cancer in the first place.
Right.
And so those are the really early applications. That corporation, if asked, would not claim themselves to be, transhumanists. They're not trying to give people the ability to customize their DNA so that they can grow like a third eye or like 4 hands or something.
Right.
Right. They're trying to do it just for the sake of. They're trying to make themselves appear to be mainstream medicine. Many transhumanists, though, point to this technology that already exists, and they say, okay, this is actually the editing of humanity via technology. So this sort of matches our definition of what transhumanism is. But as applied to the actual goals of a transhumanist, if this technology becomes really, really, really mainstream and really usable, what if somebody could do a home lab and very simply edit their own DNA? What if somebody actually wanted to change their own eye color, right? And right now there's no way that would work because it only works on a replicating cell. So a fully grown person could not change their DNA with the technology that exists now, even if it was better. But it's not unreasonable to think that sometime down the road that could happen, or that in the more near future somebody could edit the DNA of their fetus. And so this gets into very, very interesting moral questions like, is it wrong to edit the DNA of your child?
Yeah.
I ran a Facebook sort of poll about this among my friends list, which is in no means a cross section of all of humanity, but generally speaking, the discussion seemed to be. When I asked them, would you, if you had the ability to edit the hair or eye color of your baby in vitro, would you? And it was mostly either pretty hardcore libertarians or really, really, really progressive leftists who were in favor of it. The majority were against. But the other consensus seemed to be that almost everybody agreed that DNA editing for the sake of disease prevention is acceptable. And what I derive from that is that there's clearly some middle point between those of what could society find acceptable if we had the technology to edit DNA. Everyone agrees that disease prevention is perfectly fine. Most people are against purely cosmetic DNA editings.
Right.
But what's kind of in the middle? Predisposition to having a good intelligence, maybe editing height. Right. Those have functional things that aren't that wouldn't be seen as eugenic. But it falls down a very slippery slope.
It does.
Of particularly getting into socioeconomic issues.
Yes.
Could you end up with all of the rich people get to edit their kids to be very, very healthy, and all the poor people have essentially this kind of under race physically?
Yes.
There's all kinds of issues that could come from this applied, a century into the future.
As mentioned, still on the theme of transhumanism, this is from episode 54, my conversation with Michelle Battlefisher. We are talking about some of the societal risks associated with transhumanism. Yeah, I guess what I was thinking about was if some of these things are happening in sort of dark networks, and there's some kind of great innovation that comes out, and it would be great because it could, I don't know, it could cure a disease, it could make blind people see, it could, whatever, that could have some wonderful societal benefits. I guess I also expressed this question, where I asked this question of Ford when we spoke, was, well, what about, black market transhumanism? So if you go from dark network to, you're not potentially not that far away from, black market transhumanism, so that, I don't know, maybe the people that want to be, that want the designer babies, or that, that want to, be able to run, 100 meters, in less than 9.5 seconds, or whatever. The people that can, that can pay for these technologies, start to create instead of just societal benefits, you've got people that are doing it for, individual reasons, or, whether that's vanity or athletic performance, or being able to, do whatever, that's where it gets really interesting to me, because once things are out there and we know when things go, how things can, whether it's the drug trade or, things that kind of go black market, it's very difficult to control. Almost impossible, you might say.
Well, with body hacking, mm-hmm. we tend to discuss technology. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily like there was a movie called Pretty Little Things, mm-hmm. and it was really fascinating because there was like a black market in a French hotel where individuals would come in and have their kidneys removed, and
right.
You can live with one kidney, but this took advantage of a sector of society that was vulnerable.
Right.
They were vulnerable to a point, or they were to a point in their lives that they felt that they would go without a vital organ in order to satisfy some type of need that they had in their lives.
Yes.
So there can be, we really do have to be honest in the discussion of whether we would then have a super society of those who have the ability to access them, mm-hmm. versus those who are not privy to it. So if there will be some type of caste system, whether there would be eugenics interjected into this. But I would like to think that technologies that we've primarily have really trumpeted, we hope in time that those will help the community at large. Mm-hmm. But at this point, these are things that are not happening in hospitals. They're not happening mm-hmm. in doctors' offices. They're happening in people's homes, in mm-hmm. tattoo parlors, mm-hmm. and so unless you're playing Dungeons and Dragons with your friends and putting sensors, you probably wouldn't know that Friday night at 9 they're going to be putting sensors, because it's within that network of people who are aware that they're going to do that. But I think it's a really fine point as far as going back to that societal risk, because from a medical or health perspective, I do believe that we need to remember that we are connected. And so no matter what happens with that individual and how they may frame it as individual, it's affecting their families. It can then affect their communities. I know a very long time ago, a time that I would rather not repeat, I very unsuccessfully sold life insurance. Okay? Very unsuccessfully sold life insurance. Right. And and we're looking at the writers, the things that would, kind of negate the life insurance policy was like skydiving and these things that were deemed to be risk-taking. There could be a point now they're going to have, body hacking. It's like if this person hacks into their body and, something adverse happens, will that family not be able to collect the life insurance? Because, it's going to continue, it's going to bleed into our social fabric. We're just not aware. And perhaps with our documentary, people will become more aware that it will touch their lives. It's just that how quickly it'll touch their lives, I can't say.
Our next clip is from episode 43. That was my conversation with brand strategist Mark Stoiber, talking about global forces and not seeing things coming.
And oftentimes you don't see it coming, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like David Suzuki. He's a leading environmentalist here in Canada. Yes. and he talks about the pace of climate change, where if climate change was bacteria in a test tube, you watch as the bacteria exponentially increase. Mm-hmm. And as you get closer and closer to doomsday, they're coming up, but they're still right at the bottom of the test tube. And then suddenly they go up to a quarter of the way on the test tube, and you're only 2 evolutions away from the test tube overflowing. But you can't see it because it's moving so slowly. Exponential growth, though, that's the nature of it. Also, there's a friend of mine has a company called First Step, and what they do, they basically anticipate global forces. They look at global forces at play and how you can surf them or avoid them or get behind them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, what's so beautiful is that the global forces that appear so random when they collide can create an outcome that none of us anticipated. And that's what makes life juicy and exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when they're talking about anticipating or sort of riding the waves of these forces, I take it they're not trying to predict things. They're just trying to, yeah.
No, they say over here we have overcrowding in a city.
Yes.
Over here we have bullet trains. However, we don't have track that can accommodate the trains. Which direction can the track go in? What will need to be evolved?
Right.
I mean, it's even like Leonardo inventing the helicopter 450, 500 years ago. He had a working helicopter. All they needed was an engine.
Right.
Yeah. So you can't anticipate where this stuff is going to come from, but it's interesting that you can connect things. You can watch things collide. Go, I wonder if you tweak this, add a little bit of that, what will happen? And I'm living in that world now. Yes. I'm living in a world as small and tranquil as it appears on the surface. It's absolutely frantic here with people coming up with new ideas and recombining stuff.
I think a lot of that you're talking about, partly is just taking a step back and just having a look at things that are going on, and then trying to connect to a few dots. Yeah.
Well, that's the first thing I learned working in the innovation firm, is that once you're inside a company for 6 months, you lose the ability to see outside the jar. The world looks relatively normal to you, but you can't see it from the outsider's perspective. You're stuck in an invisible glass jar. And that's why, people like yourself are so valuable as a consultant, that you get paid not because you're overly intelligent, but because you see the world as an outsider would, and the perspective you bring is unbelievably valuable just for that. And I think if you can bring outsiders into your own life and go, as an outsider, how do you see this? It's very sobering oftentimes, and sometimes a bit humiliating.
Yes.
But or humbling, not humiliating. But
can be humiliating.
It's humiliating with me, but it's very humbling. It's funny when I went on my own as a consultant. I went to my old boss and I said, John, when clients used to hire us to work on multi-million-dollar pieces of business, why did they keep coming back? Why did they want to work with me? And I thought he'd say something like I was creatively brilliant or innovative or, multicultural or some sort of hogwash. And what he said without hesitation was, "You're simple." What does that mean? He said, I feel like Forrest Gump, And he goes, no, you don't get it. Simple's good. And I could not figure out what the hell he was talking about. But I went with it, and I said, well, if my job is just making complicated things simple, let's see how that works. And I started playing it to people, and it worked like crazy. It turns out simple is actually good, no matter how humiliated I was by it.
Well, it does take some expertise to be able to explain something in very simple, in a way that people can understand. It means that you really grasp the concepts. Sorry?
I'm surrounded by complicated. I'm surrounded by guys who create internet security systems.
Right. Yeah.
They can't speak human.
No.
And there's always going to be a job for the guy who can look at it and go, I don't get it. Yeah. That's all I do. I don't get it.
Right.
Who thought I was living doing that?
Up next is a clip from my conversation with Jackie Hill Murphy in episode 52. Jackie recreates the journeys of early female explorers. And in this short clip, she talks about one of those explorers, Kate Marsden, which also is the subject of her latest book, The Extraordinary Tale of Kate Marsden.
It's taken me 2 years to write this biography, and it's been quite difficult because I had to unravel her personality quite a lot. She, again, had to try and make a living for herself in a time when women didn't really have careers. So the only option really was nursing. So she became a nurse, and at the age of 17, and straight away asked to join a group of 8 other nurses who were going out to what is now Bulgaria to nurse in the Russian-Turkish War. Now, this is the end of the Ottoman Empire War. This is 1877, 1878. And what those 8 girls must have seen must have been horrendous, because we know that there were at least 50,000 deaths on the Turkish side alone. And she was nursing the Russians. So, to keep it very brief, what those girls saw and did must have created some sort of stress, post-traumatic stress, certainly in Kate Marsden. And while she was there, she seemed to make a vow to devote her life to leprosy for some reason. Her 7 brothers and sisters all had died or would die during her lifetime of tuberculosis,
right.
or consumption, which we know is a bacteria, and so is leprosy. So antibiotics cleared up most of those, straight away, and that's why we don't have tuberculosis anymore. But that was not going to be discovered for another 30 years before it became possible for that to be. So she had this great drive to help lepers. So she went back to England and became a nurse in various places, and eventually went out to New Zealand and became in charge of Wellington Hospital there and their wards. Somewhere along the line, she upset people. Things happened in her life. Maybe it was a time when she had nervous breakdowns or something like that, especially with all her family dying. It was only her mother and her left in the end. But she had these, she upset people a lot, especially in New Zealand. So she came back to England, and we're talking about the end of the 1880s. And beginning of the 1890s, was told that she was entitled to an award from the Russian royal family. So she went out to the Russian royal family to collect this award for her work in the Russian-Turkish War, 1878. And she told them that she wanted to devote her life to leprosy. And we don't know at what point, but she was told that there was a herb in Siberia that could cure leprosy. And also she found out that there were lepers who were cast out into the snow in the forest, and the word for devil was the same as lepers. And so the royal family, she got the royal family behind her to do this expedition across Russia. Went back to England, got the royal family here, Queen Victoria on her side, started collecting money to go and do this great journey to find evidence of the lepers and to find this herb. My book is a dual narrative of my story, my journey across Siberia, and her journey across Siberia, because I want to highlight how difficult it was for her. She had to do it over the course of a year by sledge and horseback at -50. Mine was doing, mine was hard enough, doing it by Trans-Siberian Express till it ran out, then Lake Baikal, then getting onto other railways, smaller railways, then getting onto bus journeys on unmade roads, because where her journey ended, where my journey ended in Sakha province, there are no tarmac roads in the whole of Sakha province, which is like 5 times the size of France or something. That's huge. It's only unmade roads. And during that time, I was doing that journey. I was really thinking about what drove her to do that, to take that. She had this outfit made by Jaeger, which was a year old in 1891, that was made using the layer effect. And she had so many layers on against the cold that actually she couldn't move. So she had to be hoisted into the sledge. Sometimes she was very ill from being in the sledge for so long and being thrown around. It was not comfortable. But finally, she got to Yakutsk, and I got to Yakutsk, and what I found, the city, which is called the coldest city in the world, and I luckily was there in summer. And she arrived at the end of winter, end of spring, so it was possible for her to get by ferry across the River Lena, which there's no way to get to Sakha province unless you get across on the ice or by a ferry. So in the breaking up season, it's just not possible to get. I mean, it's still a very, very hard place to get to. You know, all the way, people kept saying to me, "Why don't you fly?" So then she did a 2,000-mile on horseback ride around to find evidence of lepers. Her evidence did lead to the opening of a leper colony, but during that time, 1890s, evidence of her wrongdoings, dodgy lifestyle were beginning to build up and being printed in the press.
Right. Could we talk a little bit about it? Because she does have a colourful... Was it fraud that she was accused of?
Yes. I found that the best way for me to deal with writing the book was to go back and talk to her, and actually it works. I do go back in time and I do sit down and talk to her, because I just had to try and get...
How do you do that?
I flew back in time.
Okay.
That does sound very bizarre, but I used to meet her at various places, like Lion's Tea Room in London.
Okay.
And another reason for doing that was because I wanted because of course this will be translated into Russian, because they're fascinated by her in Russian. Right. And it's lovely, this links that I'm forging with this little village in a forest, which is where this leper colony is. And I have to just sidetrack for a minute and tell you that at the end of my journey, there was 100 people in full national costume in the field waiting for me. It was the most humbling moment of my life. And I think in a way that should have been for her, but she was never allowed back because of the scandal. So 125 years later, there is these people singing and dancing with the traditional music, and all in costume. It was fantastic. And they have a little museum to her there, and they have a statue, and the remains of her leper colony are there. And all that's documented in my book. But my going back to meet her also is a good opportunity for the Russians to see what life was like in London in the 1890s. And I wanted Kate to see me as a modern girl, because sometimes I'm dressed up with Victorian outfit, and sometimes I'm just dressed as I am now, with my knees showing and my hair showing, because I wanted her to see modern woman that she was really the forefront of, because she broke the mould. She had to fight against so many people who wanted to put her in her place. And so New Woman in the 1890s, of which she was one, and you know, Constance Wilde was one, and in a way, well, Mary Kingsley wasn't, but they all became the suffragists that turned into suffragettes. So that's how it went. And then you had the first women's newspapers, the penny paper, the Women's Herald. They were definitely publishing their papers talking about New Woman and new clothes, new styles of dress, the bicycle, interviewing strong women and people who were being independent, and they were beginning to have careers. So that was what all that was about. So I wanted her to see me as a modern woman. So you might think that it sounds rather strange, but I have to say it works very well. And people have told me they really like it. So I come down firmly in her favour. So at the time, she was totally destroyed by scandal through the papers. Right. She was like, you're not allowed to run your leper, your charity anymore, the St. Francis Leper Guild.
What was it that she was accused of doing?
She was accused of embezzling the funds, of lying and being a lesbian. And it was, in the end, Queen Victoria is the only person that stood by her and did not add to the criticism. She fought it all her life. She brought out a book called Vindication, but it was too late. Unfortunately, her book was called On Sledge and Horseback to Outcast Siberian Lepers, and it's got kind of like a gothic horror ring to it. And some of her detractors got it, it became her reviewers, and they just said never happened. She never went there. She never went to Siberia. So I can assure my readers she did, because I saw the same things. I was I was able to I photographed the leper colony, and I found this tiny community in a forest that adored her today. Wow. And so I'm forging links with them. and I'm sending all my material to them. I'm helping to put material into their museum.
Wow.
And that's a great thing, you know,
that
I have this friendship with
as well of someone.
Yes.
Many decades after
Yes.
after the fact,
Yes.
but it's wow. That's So as you can probably tell, we've started to move away from the big picture and more towards individual risk-taking and decision-making. And this next clip, I think, is useful, particularly in light of New Year's resolutions, but also any form of planning. It's from episode 59. That was my conversation with Cathy O'Dowd. Cathy was the first woman to have summited Everest from both the north and the south sides. And in this clip, she talks about a failed expedition and the role of planning and communication.
And then the last thing that happened, we're under incredible pressure because we're too slow. We've got this deadline of food and water. We literally have 10 days. It's Alpine style. That's all the food and water we have with us. And we can see the clock ticking down. This is like these stupid movies that are always on an artificial tick down time limit, you know?
Yes. The bomb going off. Yeah.
Exactly. We're on this ticking down 10-day thing, and we are falling behind almost from day one. You know, we literally make that first summit bid on day 11. So we're under this acute pressure. There are always too many of these urgent things that need to be done now to think about the big picture important stuff. So we stick to the plan. This is the plan we drew up at base camp at the beginning. As long as we're executing the plan, surely we're doing the right thing. But of course, because we're trying to do something that's never been done before, the plan isn't some kind of...
That's right. It's not a Bible. It's not... It's not a
set of directions the way... There is now kind of a set of directions about how to climb Everest by the Hillary route. You know, it's so well known. It's just our best hope. You get on the mountain, the conditions are not what you expect, circumstances change, you need to change the plan. And then if, you know, we've stuck to the plan while reality has been doing a big swerve off in a different direction. At some point, we actually need to bloody dump the plan.
But you need to sit down together to do that.
And that's kind of what happened after we fluffed the first summit bid. Then we sat down together and said, okay, dump the plan. The plan is history. It didn't work. Start again. This is what we've got left. This is what each individual person thinks they're capable of. These are the circumstances. What do we do? 4 of us said, okay, we think we can climb ourselves out down the Shell route. And it's the only way we can think of safely getting the hell out of here. And we'll climb for 2 days on no food to get out. And 2 of us said, and this was Rick and Sandy. It wasn't the Sherpas who have the strength expertise. It was the 2 guys with the strategic expertise, the kind of the depth of experience. They said, we're up for trying this again, and we know that this is potentially a killer choice because it is so out there, but we're going to try anyway. And it's like, yeah, okay. Your choice, that's okay.
Right.
So what interests me then is the way we kind of clung to the plan as a safety net. And it was a mistake.
Yes.
We needed to be much more flexible about adapting the plan to the reality. To do that, we needed to be more thoughtful about the information we were getting on a daily basis about the reality. And to do that, we needed much cleaner, rapid communication about what each of us are individually seeing and what that means for our plan as a group.
It reminds me of that Eisenhower quote that says, all plans are useless, but planning is useful, or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, we needed a really thoughtful plan to have any kind of shot. We needed to be going in the right direction, know where the route was, have weather information coming into us, have made thoughtful choices about how much food and gas and clothing to carry and what kind of tents we should be using and how the safety would work. Then we also needed to be able to embark on the project and accept that all that thoughtful planning can be changed, not to be too wedded to it.
Mm-hmm. And is that a lesson that you would take away around when things go wrong in other contexts? Is there something that's sort of kind of that you can translate into other domains? Do you think about that experience?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think it's actually an idea that is really quite relevant as companies increasingly try and take on the flexibility of a startup, even if they are actually, a big giant in their industry. They talk about being nimble and adaptable, able to change rapidly. I also think that that's increasingly important as we move into this incredibly unpredictable world. We're linked into this global economy, so we're affected by things that happen on the other side of the planet that had nothing to do with us. And then we're in this new economic environment post-crisis where it's kind of a little less obvious what the right choices are anymore. And then we've got, even Western governments who, produce Trump or Brexit or, none of that helps anybody feel that we know what things are going to look like a year from now, let alone have some kind of 5-year plan. I find more and more corporate executives I meet talking about kind of the VUCA dynamic.
Yes.
Volatile, uncertain, complex. And what's the A?
Ambiguous.
Ambiguous. Exactly. And so this is exactly the kind of environment in which you need to have done your planning, but also be prepared to change your plan based on new information, which means that your different experts within your teams need to be communicating with each other rapidly, frequently, and, park their ego when it comes to taking information from other experts, not just be kind of competitive and in silos.
Yes. I think we have a bit of a problem. Well, I think we have a big problem in that in organizations, in any context, even a social context, in either saying two aspects to this. One is saying, I don't know. We're always pressing each other for responses and a view. And secondly is, people simply saying, I was wrong about that. It happens in many organizations, and in the case of mountaineering, if you don't admit to not knowing, or maybe admitting to yourselves that you got it wrong, I mean, the consequences are catastrophic. So it really. I did want to talk about death to be and purpose around why you do this, because I think that really sharpens your focus, doesn't it, around decision making?
Absolutely, and I think this is the one huge difference between mountaineering and business. I think there are similarities. I mean, those are the similarities I bring to my corporate clients, but there is a huge difference, and I don't know how you solve it, because I think it's a weakness for companies. We have skin in the game, and in a sense, our choices can kill us on these big mountains, and we get feedback on poor choices reasonably quickly.
Yes.
Things go wrong fast on mountains, and our projects are reasonably short. You're out on a mountain for a month or 2 months, maybe an Arctic expedition is more like 4 or 5 months, but still. The consequences are immediate, and you bear the cost, or at least your team members bear the cost. In business, it can come back to bite you several years later.
Sure.
The people who bear the consequence are often not the executives who made the decisions. They can be other people, and they can be truly remote. I mean, I'm really surprised every time a company says to me, oh, well, we don't face risk the way that you do. And I think, all those people, actual people with pensions that were affected by the pension funds, that were affected by the worldwide economic crisis, those were real people who faced real risk, real consequences, but it's so remote from the people who are making decisions about investments. And that's one of the problems with business.
Yes.
They're making risk decisions that have real consequences, but they're consequences for utterly remote people they will never meet, and the consequences will only come home years later.
We now go to a lesson that comes from the world of fighter pilots, but it's applicable in a wide set of circumstances. It's around having a just and open culture. This is Tim Davies from episode 61. Tim is a Royal Air Force fighter pilot and flight instructor, and he gives a very interesting response to my question about preparing for the possibility of losing lives. I mean, how do you approach or cope the possibility of, losing lives in the work that you do?
Well, we have, we have obviously a flight safety culture. We have a just culture, mm-hmm. So we have a very open reporting culture in the military. Sure. And and people say this doesn't exist in the civilian sector. I work with a lot of civilians, and it does exist out there. It's just getting people to understand what it really means. Okay. A just culture doesn't mean there's no blame. What it means is it's a very open reporting culture, and if you're honest and you come forward and you say these are the mistakes that I've made, then everyone can learn from that.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, you may have to be re-educated on certain things, but this is for your benefit. It makes you safer. Mm-hmm. So we have a very open reporting procedure where I can come down from a flight and I can say, you know what, I performed badly on that flight. There's a reason for it. I might be tired, hungry, whatever, fatigued, in some kind of sense. And I can write a report on this, and then everyone else in flying an airplane in the United Kingdom, in fact, I think it actually ends up online as well. It's an open reporting system. So you can find that and you can learn from that. Mm-hmm. Now, my brother recently was flying for the Canadians. Mm-hmm. Are you Canadian, Ben? Are you?
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he was out he was flying out of, he was living in Belleville, so he was out of Toronto. I can't remember the base he was flying at. It was awful. So sorry. Flying Hercules. And he was saying that the reporting procedure there was quite closed. And I think that's to protect people. And I think I can understand that, because what they're saying is, if you report these things, we're going to protect you and everything. We're going to make sure it doesn't embarrass you. Mm-hmm. We've done the reverse for that. We've said, look, don't be embarrassed by being open about your errors. If that's the case, no one's ever going to report an error. And therefore, no one's going to learn from it. And the reason that we, I think, are a pretty good Air Force when it comes to, what are the top 10 Air Forces in the world, is because we are very open with this. And you'll hear guys in the crew room over a cup of tea saying, I made a mistake yesterday, this is what I did. And there's not one man or woman in that crew that's ever going to criticize them, because they could be next, right? They could be the next guy.
Yes.
And we've all got friends that have flown into the ground anyway. And, if we'd been a bit more open, maybe back in the day, back in maybe the 80s and 90s, some of these things wouldn't have happened. So, and like, the Nimrod, the famous Nimrod accident from 2006, which brought our whole military aviation authority construct that we operate under, there were huge failings in that if people had been a bit more honest about that, the accident probably wouldn't have happened. And the way I call it an accident, it's an incident, isn't it? Because there's always someone or something that's responsible for that. So that's how we do it. It's a big just culture, open reporting. I don't believe people wake up in the morning and go to work thinking, I'm going to do something bad today. Yeah. I think we get ourselves into a position where sometimes it's easier to just not be open about something, or we'll leave it a bit later, and then something bad happens and you lose some money or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so we struggle with that. I mean, people in the risk space struggle with that all the time, because risk, sometimes raising a risk is, to me, is a good thing. If somebody comes up to whatever organization and says, I think we need to be careful about this, well, that's a good thing. But in some corporate cultures or organizational cultures, that doesn't happen, because being the bearer of bad news doesn't win you points, unfortunately. But it's much better to raise it and have it not happen than have it happen and said, well, we should have known about it. But it's a real struggle in some places, to be perfectly honest. And I've seen it. Unfortunately, a lot of the risks that I think occur, particularly the big corporate scandals, if you go back and look at the things that have been public, like Volkswagen and some of the others, Enron, and there were indications and signs that these things should have been picked up, or they would have been if people had listened. And so I think that is what you describe as a great way of running an organization, not being afraid to say, well, yeah, I made this mistake or what have you. I think that's a good lesson there. And we also delude ourselves as individuals as well. I think
we do actually. Yeah. It's very easy to do that. That's why you need some real solid friends with you, and sometimes, and that's the great thing. I'm part-time guy on the squadron now, so I just deliver flying training. But when I used to run a team of instructors, my instructors taught the other instructors how to teach the students. That was the idea. And those guys, after a year, were the most honest guys you'd ever come across. So these are the guys that would stand up first thing in the morning in front of the entire squadron as the most experienced operators on the squadron, and they'd still say, look at the mistake I made yesterday. And what they're saying to these guys is, look, if I can do this, then you can do this too. Let's not be embarrassed about it. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes we still have an old school element within the service. And of course, it's a little bit different from them because they're a bit worried about how they look in front of people.
Right.
But that's fine, and I get this in business as well. I don't want to be part of a business like that. That's a worry about how they look. So I'm very much into an open sort of culture. And even then, sometimes, to be completely honest with you, I'll come back from a sortie where I've made an error, and I'll think, if I tell someone about this, they're going to have a look at the amount of hours I'm flying, and they're going to say I'm not current enough to fly these airplanes, and they're going to stop me flying. And the first thing I do is I go to another guy in the squadron and I say, I'm feeling this, and he will say, okay, let's talk it through. Why are you feeling this? What are your core beliefs in this? Why don't you want to own up to these errors and these mistakes? Because that's what they are. They're mistakes. There's a reason for them, and it just might mean that I'm not that current in the particular discipline I'm teaching. I haven't flown it for a while. I need to go and do some more practice. I might need to grab a simulator sortie. I had a simulator today that went through a whole world of emergencies, and that's all they do. They throw emergencies at you again and again and again. Right. And this isn't a sim you can fail. So they put you in a simulator. There's no failing this simulator. Now, we can fail trips, we can fail some sims, but this particular simulator, this emergency sim, where they everything that can go wrong in the airplane, they test you on. All the mechanical stuff, everything else, and you run through drills, and sometimes you have to eject but there's no failure from it. You learn the lessons so that you're better the next time. And that's really powerful, knowing that when you go into these particular sorties, it's not about you passing or failing, it's about you exploring your own vulnerabilities within that space. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So this is why coaches, I think, and mentors are so beneficial to corporations as well, because they're external and they can sit there and they can ask a guy, what are your fears about working here, and then they can explore that and get down. I think in cognitive behavioral therapy, they call it the downward arrow. You can ask questions and get down to the person's core beliefs, and it just makes the organization more powerful. I mean,
our next clip is from episode 65 with Mark Hannaford. Mark runs something called World Extreme Medicine, and we talk a little bit about learning and doing things at the extremes, as well as optimism. In any number of fields, that's where a huge amount of value gets created, when you take a little bit from one field,
the margins and bringing the margins together.
Exactly. And that's where innovation happens, and that's where the great discoveries happen, and or just.
Well, great discoveries would be great, but even just a small one would be nice.
Small ones, yes, absolutely.
And generating new research projects, and
what's great, I think we certainly in the academic context sometimes, and I feel this professionally, is we get specialized, right? We're in the little silos, and that creates insularity and inertia, and we need to start to break out of those things.
Going right back to the beginning, I think one of the benefits of being a geographer is you're a master of no trades, but a jack of all, and actually and also I think helpfully in my particular instance, being a non-clinician allows me a little bit to sit back and not be blinded by obstacles and actually just break bridges, because I don't know enough not to do it.
Yes,
and actually there's a benefit there.
I'd like to talk just a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, because you are quite the entrepreneur, and I wanted to talk about perhaps your own views and philosophies on risk and uncertainty and doing what you do, and do these things just sort of happen naturally? You just kind of you're in a space, and then there's the adjacent space of you're working with across the divide, and then you see this, we do this on medicine, and wouldn't it be great if we start to bring people together? And I'm curious.
I'm not sure that certainly my entrepreneur experience has been both hugely positive, but also really quite stressful at times as well, as any entrepreneur's journey is. I'm not sure I've really stood back from it sufficiently to be able to identify what the elements of that are, except to be able to identify the bits in me I desire to create. And the desire to create means that often, those flights of fancy, and I think that's perhaps the difference between a dreamer and an entrepreneur, and those flights of fancy, you start breaking them down into the little bits that make components which make the next steps, and those next steps generate their own energy. And typically the way that I personally worked is when you're making those steps and you're getting, we actually did this yesterday. We connected with an organisation to build a sort of actually a very new sort of medical sort of training program, and it was purely by sitting down and dreaming and thinking, well, how could we do that? And I think when you get the dots connecting and there's a creative energy, that's how I've personally followed my line, and it's just dreaming and being. And I've got children now, so I want to stay in. I travel a lot with them, but I want to be a father. So going away and doing expeditions, to my mind, doesn't really give me the time that I want to spend with my children. But as a consequence, so that's going right back to the beginning and waking up every day with a different view outside my tent, translates into the way that I erratically at times run my businesses, in so much as every day is different, because we're generating new ideas, we're generating new projects on a relatively constant basis, and it's the joy I personally get out creation or creating the new, which drives me forward. And it does mean that my tent door has a different view each day, and it might be one driven by creativity or doing the extreme medicine, or actually might be going away on trips.
How do you look at, manage the risks that your businesses face, and what do you do about those things?
With some degree of erratic success, and at times less so. So I think as one gains more and more experience, that becomes more instinctive and intuitive. And I guess I'm less of a structural leader, creator, and I'm more of an intuitive creator. So it's, I think running relatively small businesses puts you very close to the coalface. So you're always quite aware of the risk you're taking, because actually it impacts on you very very quickly. So how do I ameliorate risk? I think it's by, I know my market really well, so that certainly helps. I know, I spend and we as a team spend a reasonable time looking at competition and what other people are doing. One of the advantages of being one of the leaders of what we're doing is that nobody's done what we've done before, so you don't know whether it's going to be successful or not. So now it's about, I think we probably jump a little bit less quickly than we did, but when we jump, we do so with a bit more experience and knowledge behind us. When we know things that haven't worked for us, and we know things that do work for us. So there is a pool of knowledge that's travelling with us now that we didn't have, obviously 10, 20 years ago. But what we do is all about people. So the risk is that we meet somebody and we don't connect with them. But generally, the people we're connecting with are empathetic and adventuresome. It's a natural progress.
Yes, that's great. What a wonderful business to be in, and world to you've really forged the world that you want for yourself out of the various experiences that you've had, and that's I think it's a great lesson.
I think I feel that we're delivering social benefit. We're enabling doctors to be better doctors in different places, and clinicians to find new opportunities and go out and do medicine in remote areas better.
You seem like an optimist, about the state of the world, even though some of what you're dealing with on the sort of maybe or some of the people that you're working with on the natural disaster side, or conflict zones, or when you read the headlines, as we were talking about, it can certainly depress us. But you're on the coalface of that, and there's a I can sense a positivity around where the world is going with you. But maybe I've got that wrong.
Well, I think, do you know what I mean? There is. I'm excited about what we're doing, and I think virtually everybody that we work with that works in the field on these things is also they tend to be optimists, because actually you have to be an optimist to think that you're going to come home.
Yes.
And come home in one piece.
Yes.
So if you were a more negative personality, you probably wouldn't go in the first place, because you'd probably think the risk was too strong.
Sure.
So one of the great joys of what I do is being surrounded by massively clever, bright, adventuresome optimists, and it does make for a happier world for me.
Next, we have a clip from my conversation with Alex Sidorenko, who's a risk management expert, from episode 53. We were talking about decision-making and cognitive biases.
Humans are inherently, and I think this is where we're sort of moving into less professional risk space, but just general, human life, is that people are actually not very good at thinking about risk and making decisions under uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that's where, that was a few years ago. That's when I started doing a lot of research into the work of Nobel Prize winners like Daniel Kahneman or Vernon Smith, Amos Tversky, and like dozens others, including some very cool guys in the Russian universities that do a lot of research in neurosciences. And all of they combined, like 60 years of research, quite ultimately tells us that just because you've trained somebody to think about risk, or you've asked them nicely to talk about risk, or you've given them some high-level slogans and feel-good statements that risk is part of everybody's responsibility, no one will care. It's so inherently deep inside our brain that we do not think about risks in business context, in complex scenarios. That I had to rethink the whole approach to risk management, and we've been doing a lot of study and training in Russia to try and promote that side of risk management, the sort of the human brain side, how it works.
Could we maybe talk about that just a little bit? So Kahneman and Tversky, they wrote this book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is highly recommended. And you're right, there's a lot of work that's recently come out. I think all of this academic work has been around for a long time, but one of the things that really came out was after the global financial crisis, a lot of this stuff came out and people started to look at it and say, holy shit, there's all this good stuff about how we make decisions, and we're not applying it to our organizations and how we work, and these terms of cognitive bias really started to make its way into the lexicon, but we still haven't really caught up. But maybe, I don't know if you could we could talk about one or two examples of certain types of biases that we have that are very common when we make decisions. I don't know if anything springs to mind in particular.
Sure. I'll give some history behind that as well, because this is fascinating stuff. Whoever is listening to this right now should definitely find Daniel Kahneman's book, at least, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a bestseller. So unlike all the actual academic research, it's written in a very easy to understand language, and it's easily digestible. So that essentially talks about the two frames of mind, the two systems in our brain. We have system one thinking, which is the quick unconscious one, and that's what helps us survive. This is what we use for making day-to-day decisions. That's why we can play sports. That's why we can do million of things. That's what makes us human. But when it comes to uncertain situations, system one gives us a lot of errors, and those errors are consistent. So different people in the same situations would make the same mistakes. And they would probably make those mistakes time after time after time after time. Our brain is just very powerful at deceiving ourselves. So we need to really start switching on the sort of system 2 thinking, which is analytical, it processes information, it tries to overcome our immediate tendency to lie to ourselves and to others. And risk management is essentially the kind of tool that triggers that system 2 in our brain. So we need to build a number of checklists, templates, examples, words, tools to help humans think about risks. Because I think that's the biggest lie ever sold to us by consultants is that executives think about risk anyway when they make decisions. That is just not true. They think about some of the risks some of the time, and they ignore 90% of the important.
Absolutely. And if you think about what it's like to be a leader of a major organization, a corporate, a business, even a small business, the amount of information that you have to process, and those fast-thinking systems are really designed to provide a bit of an evolutionary advantage. You shortcut. You don't have to think through everything, so we do shortcuts and we work off of patterns. But as you say, that's prone to error. So you have, Jack Welch, who listen to your gut and all of this stuff, which gut thinking comes from repetition of patterns, and so things come out and you can make a quick decision. But the stuff that you don't see coming are things that if you actually stop and take a look, you could figure it out. But if you go via your system 1, you will miss, and that's why
exactly. And there are over the last 60 years there have been discovered around 200 different cognitive biases, and they continually being discovered, the new ones. A lot of that information is available on just basic Wikipedia. There's a page which is called List of Cognitive Biases, as well as a lot of literature, obviously. But I have my favorite ones.
Yeah, what are your favorite ones?
In investment decision making. So this is the first one. I always forget the official name, but this is the essence of the cognitive bias. When things are good, people are risk averse. So when things are good, when you're trying to sell an investment, or when you're trying to sell your apartment, and it's a good market, nothing is bothering you, you will be very risk averse. So you will settle for less money as long as you avoid the uncertainty. The uncertainty is just too much pressure for you. People are risk averse when things are good. From a risk management perspective, that's not bad. It's not ideal, it's not economically viable, because a lot of value is being lost and left on the table. But it's not bad from a risk management perspective. What is bad is that these same people, 5 seconds later, when things turn bad, they become super risky. And this just blows my mind. It's essentially sitting at the board table, and you have your first project being discussed, and everything's good. And everybody's super risk averse, saying, no, let's not take any risk, let's not do anything with it. And then literally 5 minutes later, you turn to a second project, and it's a bad project, it's a toxic investment. And everybody's suddenly going, let's put more money into it, let's try and turn this around, let's risk some investment, let's do. And this is just mind-blowing.
Yes.
The same person in the situation when everything's good doesn't like risk. And that very same person, when things turn that good, when things are uncertain or bad, becomes super risky. And this is something that we need to be aware, is when we're in a situation when something doesn't feel good, when it's uncomfortable, our brain will be telling us to make more risky decisions. And that's very dangerous. I mean, that's how people... it's kind of selling your apartment when the market is down, and you will be making so many bad, risky decisions if you don't follow a proper structured process. If you don't structure your brain, your thinking. So that's number one. The second one is the ever popular confirmation bias. It basically tells us that we see information and we interpret information through the lens of the decision that we've made in our brain. So once we made up our minds on something, on anything, for example, let's go to Thailand for holidays, our brain will ignore anything that contradicts this. So for example, there may be a revolution, another colored revolution. Our brain will find a reason to convince us that that is not significant. But if we'll see a picture of a beautiful beach and it will say welcome to Thailand, our brain will extrapolate that, giving it so much more significance, making us completely disregard the real risks. I'm not saying Thailand is a bad destination by any means, but I'm just saying confirmation bias is fun. It's fun. And the final, I mean, I have about 20 that I usually talk about in all different trainings, but the final one is called the mission bias, and it basically tricks our brain to think that not doing anything is better and more ethical than doing something that is unpopular. And that's just that is not just business. I mean, that's our day-to-day life. When we have to call and have a difficult conversation with someone, when we have to have a conflict with somebody at school or at work, our brain will tell us that it's better not to do anything than to do something that will make us uncomfortable. And that's just a lie. Normally, that just extrapolates the problem 10 times and it blows out sooner or later. And it's usually much worse than taking the sort of the stand or the decision. Yet, this is how our brain works. It tricks us into thinking that it's better not to do anything.
Let's continue with the theme of decision making with Tom Harden, aka Tipper X. Tom was the informant in the largest insider trading case in the United States, the one that brought down the Galleon Group and Raj Rajaratnam. And in this little clip, we talk about, or Tom talks about, crossing an ethical line.
Maybe it was starting with, Rajaratnam kind of setting the tone, or however you want to look at it, but we're brazenly crossing the line, just sort of saying that law, I guess in a sense, just saying, I know I'm crossing the line, but that this law is never prosecuted.
Right.
And, or, if it was, it would be at most a civil infraction. And so my partner and I at this point, I was with a partner. We had a small hedge fund. I was a junior partner, and we had a good start in 2006. And, as we talked to investors about investing more money in our hedge fund, they'd say, oh, you're not outperforming Galleon, which is Rajaratnam's hedge fund. And so, we knew what was going on there. Or, as I said, kind of got wind that they were already crossing the line. And so we weren't able to grow our fund as much as we liked because we weren't outperforming the industry stalwart. If you're an institutional investor, you're going to take career risk if you give money to a little fund like ours and we don't do well versus just giving more money to Galleon and the other big tech hedge funds. And so we were kind of frustrated that we knew what was going on and we weren't crossing the line and doing what they were doing, and didn't really even have the connections to even, if we wanted to know about mergers or takeovers before they happened, I didn't have that level of contact develop, or I don't think I ever would have pursued it aggressively. But then, so just to get back to your question about when I knew I'd crossed the line, in March of 2007, so going into the following year, I got a call from Rumi Khan, and she said, my cousin in New York, his roommate works for Moody's, who rates debt, and so he knows that Kronos, which is a technology company, is going to be acquired next week at a specific date, a specific price, and by a specific private equity company, because I guess Moody's is rating that new debt that the private equity company is going to use to issue to buy the shares in the cash deal. And so so that was the first time that I had ever gotten such specific information. Like, I could tell that was not a rumor. You hear rumors all the time, so-and-so is going to buy so-and-so, and that's just part of the business.
This was very precise.
Very precise. Yeah. Like, I talked to this person sort of to validate her source, and here's the price, here's the date, here's the acquirer. And at the same time, she had told me before that her client, her hedge fund client, Trivium Capital, only wanted inside information from her. So she had already told me this, and I had not distanced myself from her when I had learned this maybe a year or two prior. And so, You
in one of the slides that you sent me, you said that you had a sense that Rumi was unethical already. You could
just talking to her over the years. It was I knew she had worked in the industry. She had worked at Galleon. I did not know that she had already been convicted for wire fraud.
Right.
That was a whole different story where she briefly just had worked at Intel in the late 90s in marketing, had met Rajaratnam at some point, and he had promised her, I think held over her head the promise of a job, and then she in return for information about Intel, and so she was faxing him information from Intel, and then left Intel, worked for him, and then was actually approached by the FBI after she left Galleon a few months later. And I don't blame her for anything that happened to me. I made my own decisions, but what I do blame myself for is just keeping her. So in my investor network, I can look back now and say that was a huge mistake, because she had told me her client, Trivium Capital, wanted inside information.
Right.
And so that's what she was going to try to go after. So Tom at the time should have said, okay, I should disassociate myself at this point, but I didn't. And that's I can look at many mistakes I made, and that was one of them. So, so she had called me then in March of 2007, and that was what seemed to me like to be perfect information. And so I went through, I didn't buy any stock at first. I talked to a friend in a proprietary trading firm and said, later we were just talking about stocks, and I said, I'm hearing this Kronos is going to be acquired next week. And he said, oh, really? And then he passed it on to an individual who sat next to him, whose name was Zvi Goffer. And Goffer would be later get 10 years in prison because his nickname on the trading desk was Octopussy, because he had his, quote, tentacles. Everybody has an interesting nickname that the FBI or whoever gave them later as they were building these cases. And because he had his tentacles in law firms, accounting firms, investment banks, he, his business model was, crossing the line essentially. And he was a day trader, I think, through the industry. And so, he bought a bunch of Kronos, and then my friend said, why don't you just buy some? And then as I walked through my presentation, the rationalization process of, explaining, I think, rationalization, we can all find ourselves to some degree how we do that. It's a human thing we do. We rationalize. Of course, I said everybody's doing it in the sense that I knew what was going on in the industry. I'll just buy a little bit of stock because it was all about, as long as I could feel like I was still a good person. If I bought a lot of stock, I'd feel like I was doing a bad thing, but I could just buy a little bit.
That's really interesting, because you mentioned Dan Ariely, and he talks about that most people when they, most people don't tell these big lies, they tell little lies, so that, take a little bit off the table, or, it's not a big capital fraud, it's just skimming a little bit, and
yeah, absolutely. I discovered his work not even until this year, and I was almost like, my God, this explains exactly my thought process. For years, I could figure out why I did it. So I think about maybe a year ago, I saw the Netflix documentary Dishonesty, and then sort of researched his books and read some of his books and watched. His presentations are fantastic on these experiments he does. And so rationalization, and a big part with insider trading is, at the time, you can just say, oh, it's a victimless crime. I'm just buying stock. Who am I hurting? There's no victim on the other side of this trade. There's no, I'm not stealing from anyone. In fact, when I went to court to plead guilty later, the judge asked the prosecutor, are the victims in the courtroom? And he said, there are no victims. And, in terms of like who I stole money from, who did I owe money to, which most white collar crimes, you've stolen money from somebody, investors, and you've got that liability. But for this crime, there wasn't. So that's very easy to justify, and also just buying a little bit of stock. And I kind of went through a line of thinking, like, if I were to be flagged for this, well, that guy at Moody's, he's the guy that would be in trouble, because he's the guy that actually tipped the information. I just answered the phone. Rumi called me. I just bought the stock. Like, I could maybe say it's a rumor later, that type of thing. And then
I did. I think it's worth parking here just a little bit longer, because we talked just now about sort of crossing the line, and you knew about crossing the line, but it seems to me that there's a lot here that already contributed to this moment. You're in an industry, you're chasing these guys, Galleon, who I guess you suspected that they're trading on insider information all the time, and people are doing it right and left, given the quote of the 60% of the deals. Is that right? And
right.
You've got people sort of doing. I'm not trying to rationalize it for you, but I'm just
right.
there are a number of contributing factors that you're in a culture and environment where it seems to be happening. You're trying to do a good job. By providing returns. So you get to this point, and a lot of momentum is already built up to this point. That's difficult to unwind, and I suspect that's how a lot of this stuff happens in other cases.
Yeah, I think to your point, the environment, the people that we associate ourselves with. I say in my presentation. I mean, this is said at many places, but you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. Yeah. I've seen that quoted several times, and I thought, especially for me, wow, that really, as I look back now, that sure is true. And so it does have to do with the environment, and excuse me, knowing that it was happening at the time pretty rampantly, as I said, in the industry at Galleon, and that just led to that fateful day, the phone ringing in the office. I wasn't spending my career trying to figure out how am I going to cross the line. I didn't go to the office that morning thinking today would be a great day to commit security fraud. And, and so it wasn't like I was actively, I don't think I was like an octopusy, like trying to always cross the line. Like I was doing legitimate work. And just so when that opportunity came up to, skim a little bit here and take a little bit, excuse me, some water, take some crumbs off the table, so to speak, I was able to tell myself, why not? Everybody else is doing it. Obviously, it's not being prosecuted. If it's been going on for a year or two.
Our next clip is from episode 61. That was with negotiation expert Linda Swindling about asking outrageously for what you want.
So we had the opportunity to be in a studio audience of the old Tonight Show with Jay Leno when Jay Leno was the host.
For my non-U.S. and North American viewers, he is, a major icon, like superstar.
Right, and a talk show host.
Yes.
In the evenings.
Yes.
And he's a comic now. Has his own. He's a great guy.
Really funny comic, by the way.
Hilarious. And I watched him live, and really, I didn't see any notes. And he did a 90-minute monologue with no notes. It was shocking. So anyway, he comes out after the warm-up, kind of comedian or whoever warms you up, and then he comes out and takes questions from the audience before he did the live show, before he did the Tonight Show that night. And someone had told me, hey, he will do this. So I was prepped with my question, and I had something I really wanted, and then I did the nice, safe question, so he would like me. And that's what I'm finding. A lot of people have this nice, safe question, and they hope to get into the big question.
Right.
So the nice, safe question was, I said, what do you like about your job? Or what's difficult about your job? And I thought, well, that'll make me sound smart, and then I'll ask him for what I really want, my follow-up. And so he said, well, I don't know. What's difficult? I get paid a lot of money. I interview famous people. I drive really fancy cars. And before I could do part 2, the thing I really wanted, he moved on. And the lady he pointed to just away from me said what I really wanted. She said, Jay, can I get a picture? And he said, sure, come on down. And as she's going, and running down, he turns back and looks at me and he says, that's what you really wanted, isn't it? And I nodded and I started rising, and he made this gesture and he said, well, she asked.
Wow.
Oh, man. Wow. I felt so small. And I of course, I'm there with lots of friends. And, and that was the thing. I had the opportunity, didn't I? I was the one. I was first. The opportunity, he was going to grant that opportunity to me, but I blew it by not asking for what I really wanted. And so it was because I wanted him to like me, because I wanted, that safe question first, that I didn't ask outside my comfort zone for what I really wanted. And people do this all the time. They, a third of us have done like I did, where you knew what you wanted, you could have asked for it, you didn't, and then you saw someone else get it. So maybe it was an overseas assignment, maybe it was some new project to work on, maybe it was for a raise, maybe it was a promotion, whatever it was, there was one, or there was a limited amount. You knew about it, you could have asked for it, you didn't, and it went to someone else. And that's where asking, even though it's a little uncomfortable for you, even though it feels like a risk, actually can pay off big. And when people do ask, they're amazed. Even if somebody tells them no, at least they've told them what they're interested in, right? So when you make a request that somebody says, no, not yet, at least they know that you're interested in going overseas, having the promotion, doing that different kind of project, trying something new, getting some education. At least there's that interest. And now it they start simmering on it. They start thinking about it. So that maybe later it is the right time, or they'll come back to you.
I've had that with podcast guests, some famous people, and it was come back when you've got 50,000 Twitter followers or something like that.
Right.
Which is okay. I will.
But that's not a no. What was that? That was more information.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so you said, okay, so it is possible once I blank, whatever it is.
Yes.
And some people, believe it or not, this happened just with getting this book written. I asked a friend, I said, I'm going to self-publish this because I just did what you just referred to. I had done a TEDx audition. At SMU, and then they had chosen me for their big TEDx talk in the fall. And I said, I'm thinking about doing this book. And she said, I would go to my publisher on that one. And I said, really? And she said, yep, that's where I would go. And so sure enough, I asked, and the next week I had, can you get us this, and this? We want to do the book.
Nice.
I asked for endorsements, and some of the people you would think, somebody who were just really similar writings and everything else, said no. But guess who said yes? Dan Pink, who's a huge author, on business books in the U.S. and globally. He said yes. Some of the other people, I had a lot of endorsers that said yes, that I thought, wow, are you kidding me? And one had told me, somebody else had told me he would never do that book. And I just asked, and he said, okay, send it to me. Let me look at it. It's good. Let's do it. So sometimes, even if people tell you no, you have to ask.
Yeah, that's so cool. And you'll get no's, right? That's part of the...
That's expected.
Yes.
That's what you already have.
Yes.
You already have a no,
yes.
right?
Yeah, that's right.
So
once you hear it,
difference?
that's right. Once you hear it, a couple of times, you get a little bit insulated, and you're not afraid to just give it a shot. So
now, do you have garage sales or yard sales?
Yeah, we call
them
them car boot sales. So a boot is your car trunk.
Yeah,
so they'd have these things in fields, and people bring their old stuff in their trunks of their car boots, and then they would have these sales. Yeah.
So different cultures, even different parts of your country, whatever country you're in, have different beliefs about bartering and about offering for higher or lower amounts. And sometimes it's just the way you were raised in your family. So one of the ways I got over, feeling like I was being greedy, because I was brought up not to be greedy, not to ask for too much, get seconds, that type of thing, was I actually went to what would have been a boot sale, but here it was garage sales and yard sales, and I would only put a certain amount of money in my pocket. So let's say I had my checkbook with me and $100 in the car, or $50 or $20, whatever it was. As a young mom, I probably only had 20. I would only put $5 in my pocket. And so when I would go in, I'd say, well, I only have $5 on me, which was true, right? And I'd say, I see this says $35. Could I have it for $5? And if they said no, I didn't need it that much anyway.
Right.
Or if I really wanted it and they came to 15, I'd say, well, I've got some money in my car, you know, if it was $5 or $10 more than what I had, whatever. But that practice of hearing no is what got me over it. So maybe if you weren't raised that way, if it's impolite and you know that it's important to you to start asking for more, go somewhere, go to where there's strangers. I went to different neighborhoods than mine. Go practice. Do you have flea markets there as well?
Sure. Yes.
Kind of, yeah. Go practice in a flea market. You will never see those strangers again.
Right.
And ask courageously. Ask, you know, we have coupons where, you know, the coupon comes on September 1st and it's October 30th. Ask them. Say, will you honor this? I know it's about to be the sale. Just ask.
Next is a clip from my conversation with Casper Craven from episode 64. Casper sailed around the world with his family over the course of 2 years. Now, what goes into planning something like that? Here's a little taste.
Again, so going back, so when we had the idea back in 2009, and we did those 6 months of the vision and planning, then what followed was the significant planning. So one of the components was increasing the skill levels, primarily of Nicola, to get her sailing, and as importantly, to get the children used to sailing. And then we looked through all our different skill sets that we had to say where are the areas that we need to develop most. So in terms of raw sailing experience, we plan to go sailing every year, and we started off in very gentle Mediterranean sailing in the lightest wind conditions, so that we could get the kids used to being on the boat, used to being on the water. And actually, we'd always taken them on boats since they were since they were born, down fishing dinghies down in Devon where I grew up. And so it was just building up that bedrock of experiences. So starting with gentle stuff. I know so many people who've been put off sailing because they go out and someone takes them out in the foresight and the Solent and it's cold, wet, they're seasick, and they're never going to go on a boat again. And so I was very conscious that we didn't want that to happen. So it's just gently layering up these experiences. And then we would do more testing passages as the experience built. So that was the first thing. So every year planning sailing, and it's interesting, when we had the plan we only had 2 children. By the time we left we had 3 children. That was all planned for. But when we first went sailing with our youngest one, Willow, she was 4 months old. At that stage, we thought, okay, so we're now outnumbered by children. So the first time sailing for 2 weeks, we took some very experienced friends of ours, so like the gentleman I referred to earlier who was on the Global Challenge with me, and his kid's godfather, his vast experience. So we sort of looked at each situation and said, okay, how do we mitigate the risks in this? And it's not a reason to not do it. And it's funny because when everyone has said to us, you shouldn't do it, everything they said to us, we didn't ignore it. We wrote them down, and they weren't reasons not to do it. They were things for us to think about, to do our research and come to our own conclusion on what we were happy with, based on being as well prepared as we can. Because in life there's a risk in everything, and if you say I'm not going to do anything, there's a risk, and it's like you're not going to leave the house today. So, and it's like we definitely were not cavalier with risk. We listened to everything that people said, and we figured out how we were going to get comfortable with that. So then going back to the other training is, I didn't have much experience sort of with diesel engines. Nicola didn't have, or neither of us had much medical experience. So I went and did diesel maintenance course. We both did offshore safety courses, and both of us did the 10-day ship's doctors course. So we became qualified as ship's doctors. We took an insane amount of medical gear, every sort of drug under the sun that you're legally allowed to take on a boat. So again, it's just thinking through every single thing, saying how do we mitigate this risk.
So if you're in the middle of the ocean and one of your kids gets sick, then you've got you had I assume you had some sort of a plan.
Correct. So, I mean, we had full medical kit, mm-hmm. we had full drugs list, mm-hmm. and we had satellite phone on board. Mm-hmm. A very good friend of ours, the doctor, we left her a full list of everything that we had on board, mm-hmm. so that she had a mirror of what we had, so we could call her up and say, this is the situation, this is what we have. The satellite phone had the number for the Falmouth Coast Guard, mm-hmm. where there was always a doctor on. So we had mm-hmm. different routes mm-hmm. to be able to get access to information. Mm-hmm. And, for our passages, we planned them so there would be other boats around, and we were always mindful of saying, where's the other boats who have a doctor on board? So that... so again, you're just thinking about these things,
all of these
and there's statistics around that say that it's more dangerous to drive your car down the road than just to go sailing around the world. Frankly, statistics like that just wind me up because it makes it sound like it's a walk in the park, and it's not. There are risks, and it would be crazy to suggest otherwise. It's a question of being cognizant of those risks and doing as much as you can to mitigate them. They're not reasons to stop, but they're, you think deeply about it. You use different things to find a way around it. So.
Yes. What were some of the other big ones that we haven't explored or
in terms of risks?
Yes.
So piracy was a risk.
Yes.
So basically we paid a lot of attention to our routing and made sure that we weren't going to go anywhere near pirate zones. Hurricane seasons, we planned our route around the world so we would have the most benign conditions wherever we were. So things like that, cool. Basically. So.
This next clip comes from episode 47. That was my conversation with Charles Cassidy. Charles runs a site called Evidence-Based Wisdom, and in that episode we had a rather long conversation about bias management, but this short clip discusses post-truth uncertainty and expertise.
Have the perspective that we think's right. Of course, because if we didn't think it was right, we'd move to where we thought it was right. So asking people to be able to see things from perspectives that aren't theirs is almost as hard as number one, But wise people seem to have this facility for being okay with seeing things in two ways at the same time, not feeling the need that it needs to be resolved. And this blows open the whole sort of post-truth argument. It's like... because I'm responding to this post-truth thing in a slightly different way than I think other people are.
Okay.
Maybe we should come back to that.
Well, let's come back to that. But,
but wise people seem quite comfortable with the idea that there are many ways of looking at things, and they don't view it as a threat. They don't view you seeing something different means I'm under threat. They're like, okay, tell me, give me your eyes, tell me what's going on over there.
It seems to me that and maybe I'm just talking a load of rubbish, but that it's similar to the emotional piece, but when you describe that different perspectives, is there's a slight distancing in a good way of one's identity from one's opinion, political opinion or perspective, and that's very healthy, and that allows one to sort of look at different perspectives. You're not sort of emotionally invested in, well, I believe in, I'm a social conservative, or I'm a, and that's who I am, and that's I attach my identity, and everyone around me knows that's who I am, and
Absolutely. I mean, this ties in really nicely with the last one in the bias section is uncertainty management, which is kind of
this is why we're here. One of the themes of the show.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
This is I wanted to dive into that.
Yeah. Yes. So if you are comfortable with uncertainty, you're going to become less identified with your opinion, right? Because you can't be certain it's right.
Exactly.
So that ties back in neatly with being more comfortable with taking different perspectives. So. Uncertainty's got really bad press, doesn't it? I mean, it's like it's a bad thing, but it's not. It's a great thing. And certainty is a myth. So we would all do ourselves a lot of good to grow up a little bit and stop viewing uncertainty as a dirty word and embrace it and say, we obviously take a stance, we take a view, because you have to take a view. You can't just sit there, paralyzed by incomplete information. But you have, if you're comfortable with uncertainty, then you're going to be comfortable with that your view could change. If someone attacks it, you go, okay, well, this is good. I am getting more information to become less uncertain. So I think we expect too much of our politicians. We expect them to constantly be really clear about every aspect, every policy. This is definitely right. Which politician would stand up and go, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not really sure about this. I need to look into it a bit more. We don't have any appetite for that. We don't seem to as a culture, and that serves us poorly, I think. So uncertainty, if wise people are comfortable with uncertainty, and that allows them to more to hold on to their opinions less tightly.
Yes. Interestingly, there's a book called Future Babble by a guy by the name of Dan Gardner, and I'm not sure if he came up with this study or he was quoting another study, but he talks about predictions, and I've incidentally tried to get him on the show. If anyone's listening and knows how to get in touch with Dan Gardner, please let me know. But what he was talking about was the accuracy of predictions, and he took a bunch of sort of expert predictions, or the study that he quotes. I'll try and find the details. But on the one hand, he found that the kind of hard expert predictions, I'm paraphrasing, but hard means where the outcome is sort of very binary. He found that they were no better than anyone else at making predictions. In fact, slightly worse. However, there is a class of expertise where the prediction does tend to be better and more accurate, and those are the more nuanced. On the one hand, if this happens, then we're more likely to see this. On the other hand, if it goes here, we might, this kind
sort
of
a probability distribution kind of thing.
I suppose if you were to take words and then put them in a probability distribution or something like that, it would probably map a little bit better. But it was just shades of gray, right? It wasn't that well, this is what's going to happen. This is where the oil price is going to be in a year's time. It was well, you've got these factors, and if we see a change, a change in government, or a change in interest rates or whatever, then we're likely to see it go here. And if and when you have that takes more work. People like to, or expert forecasts are very popular because we like that certainty. They're sort of modern day soothsayers almost. I mean, maybe we're wired for that certainty. So when someone comes out and says, where you see a headline that says, Brexit will lead to whatever, people will click on it because there's
I mean, I think we were talking about specialism earlier, and that's how humanity has made huge strides, is by saying that you take care of that, I'll take care of this, and I'll share my findings with you, and vice versa. And that's what we turn to our experts for. We say, I don't really want to have to do the thinking. That's what I pay you for.
Yes.
So I need you to come back with it done.
Yes.
And people do the same with opinion pieces. They go, well, I read this thing about Brexit and the conclusion was this, and I didn't have time to read all the but this was the upshots, and that's why I buy the paper to pay someone to do that thinking for me. And I can understand why people do that, because which caveman had to have an opinion on sort of 500 different policies, so their lives were a lot simpler, so they could sort of explore things directly, whereas this huge amount that we're expected to be sort of well versed on, so we just kind of outsource it. But it does lead to people being forced to have to be certain about things, which is not helpful.
In episode 44, I spoke to Eric Newton about risk in love and relationships, and in this clip, Eric talks to us about conflict in relationships.
Conflict is the access to our experience in this world. I mean, fundamentally, we are defined by our limitations. You know, we are what we are not in some sense. And you know, our experience in this world is defined by bumping up against others, and our inabilities, and that, you know, it's on one level or another, those limitations feel like some kind of pain. You know, we're just we are designed to experience pain when we hit a limit. It's an abstraction and expression of death and death avoidance. You know, it's how we're biologically built, I think. And then, so that's the broader picture. And then you get into a relationship where survival and procreation are fundamentally implicated. And then you create on top of that this concept of commitment, lifelong commitment, which is, you know, holy cow, what a big abstract. Layer that on top. And then all of the social constraints that we're up against and expectations. And there's this immense amount of pressure that activates our deepest unresolved stuff. And that's why you see in relationships, people find their greatest joy and satisfaction and connection and intimacy, and they have their worst, most existential fears and fights. And you know, you know how it is in your marriage, if you guys are fighting about something, everything else is gray. You know, most people can't just go into the rest of their life and be normal if they're in a horrible conflict with their spouse. Yeah. And that's for this reason, because, you know, it's the most intimate looking glass into our deepest, truest, most unresolved, unarticulated, unconscious selves. And so when a conflict arises, it's this gorgeous, gorgeous opportunity to say, what's going on there? You know, because the experience that each of us is having in that moment of anger and pain and frustration and blame and denial is our own experience. And as much as we want to say, hey, that's your fault, honey, you shouldn't have said that thing to me. Maybe she shouldn't have, but the experience that you had as a result of her saying it is yours. And it's a looking glass into what's really going on for who and what you are.
Wow. Yeah.
That's the beauty of those moments. I mean, you get to really look if you want to, if you're willing, if you can.
That's awesome. That is that is awesome. I mean, just thinking about, like, I consider myself a relatively intelligent guy, but you know, sometimes in those situations, you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, why did I say that? Now I have to, like, unwind the clock, and it, you know, it's impossible, right? So
it is impossible, and also you've got to give yourself some. I do anyway, have to give myself some compassion in those moments, because the fights are going to happen when you're under-resourced. You know, if you're happy, you know, and everything's going well with your finances, and you've got plenty of sleep the night before, and your belly's full, you know, stupid. It's a lot easier to let it slide off and not react in a way that makes it
right.
But if you're sick, like this last weekend, oh my God, it was my partner's birthday. We both have the flu. We were traveling because we were on a birthday trip for her, and we hadn't slept the night before because we were sick, and the dog was up all night. And I don't even remember how it started. One of us said something stupid, and it turned into a actual like a screaming match fight. And we were on the beach and nobody was around, and we had enough self-awareness to know that it was pretty stupid, so we were laughing as we were yelling. It was sort of a funny thing. We were laughing as we were yelling, but we were yelling. And, and we, you know, afterwards, after it all passed, we're both like, wow. I don't think we could have avoided that. I don't think like 3 hours of sleep and the flu, hungry bellies, I don't think that could have been avoided. Okay.
Yeah. I guess that's why fights always happen at the worst possible time. You know?
Yeah.
You're about to go out, or you're about to something, whatever. It seems like, or it's, it kicks off at 11:30 p.m. when you're about to, you need to go to bed and all that stuff. So it does make a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. Are any thoughts on how couples can, I don't know, fight in the best possible way?
Yeah, that's a funny. I mean, so I had this famous therapist couple on the show about a year ago, and they said, and I asked them that same question. They said, "Hey, if it's a fight, it's a fight. There is no such thing as fighting fair. A fight is a fight." Their fundamental plan in those situations is to remember afterwards that it's not the end of the universe, and then to deconstruct what happened so they can learn from it. And I think that's true. I think if it's a full-blown fight, it's a full-blown fight. You're probably not going to have a lot of self-control. The best you can do is have some compassion for yourself and your partner afterwards. But there are those disagreements where we have self-awareness. I mean, I think the out-and-out fights are pretty uncommon for most of us. Yeah. But uncomfortable disagreements and annoyances that we bury and feel slight resentment, that's all the time. And, in those moments, there are some basic tricks. The first trick, the number one most important trick probably, is to get out of your lizard brain. You've just got to get out of your fight or flight or freeze reaction. And there's some ways to do that. You hear about deep breathing, taking 10 seconds to not react and saying, so, hey, I'm going to not react. Give me a second here. And during that time, take the deep breath. Another good trick is to widen your peripheral vision intentionally. When we're in fight, or freeze, our vision narrows. We get tunnel vision. It's just the way that we can conserve resources so we can survive. And but it's just not particularly useful in a fight. So widen your peripheral vision, and that will kick in the rationality of your mind. So there's some basic tricks that you can apply, and everybody's got their tricks, but apply them. Apply them so that you can get out of your instinctive animal reaction, whatever it is. Because if you want to run, you're abandoning your partner. That's not going to work. If you want to fight, you're exasperating something that probably doesn't need to be amplified in that moment. And if you're freezing, you're not engaged. None of those are particularly useful. So that's the first step. Then the second step is to remember fundamentally that this is not terminal. The disagreement is inevitable. It's not terminal.
Yeah.
And then you can take it to, well, how can we actually use this disagreement to learn something about ourselves?
Right. Only two more of these to go, and the next one is from my conversation with Monica Sattler. Monica quit her job last year, a very prestigious job, to become an adventure cyclist. And in this clip, she talks about one of her big adventures on her bucket list for 2018 and offers some very useful advice.
Next year, actually, my biggest goal, my biggest project, and I'm yet, I'm telling you first, is actually riding the Vuelta a España. So 3,300 kilometers, 21 days, and I want to do that 3 days before the professionals, before the pros. The reason why I want to do this first is riding the Vuelta is a huge challenge. And I think there's, if we talked about it briefly beforehand, women and men are still not, there's a huge gap cycling, and especially in regards to grand tours. And I just want to show, a woman can do it too. And I will be inviting actually female cyclists along to, for this tour. Inspire others to, again, to go outside, to explore, to challenge themselves, and especially women, that you can do it. There's no reason why.
That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. Yeah.
That would be the biggest challenge.
Yeah, well, I was listening to, when I was preparing for the Haute Route, I was listening to, or was one video, I think it was with Emma Pooley, who, as you know, is a pro and has ridden the Haute Route for many years. But one of the things she was saying is that actually in the women's professional circuit, there is no race, like actual professional race that has the same level of climbing and mountains as the Haute Route, which is just an amateur race, which I found astounding. And then they reduced La Course, which is like the women's Tour de France equivalent, quite by a substantial amount this year. So it's there seems to be a discrepancy which should be addressed, quite frankly.
I hope I'm trying to get as much media attention as possible. It's by doing this, to maybe start a little bit like the ball rolling. That would be my goal to show everyone can do it. Everyone
and social media attention. You should definitely get all over that. Do some Facebook lives from your bike. You should. All that good stuff, so people can follow along. You might find that at first that people start to, and I think it's a perfect idea, because I think it's a perfect distance, because 3 weeks, then you start, and people at first are just kind of like, oh, I've heard about this, but then as it goes on, more and more people will tune in. So so hopefully.
It eventuates, Currently, I'm working on business development in that sense. Like I'm looking out for collaboration partners for this, because this is a big undertaking. And the more collaborators and the more partners, the better.
Very cool. Have you thought about like crowdfunding and this sort of thing? People can contribute to your cause or something?
Yeah, that would be actually... Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I'll let people know. But no, this is what an awesome idea. You have to keep me appraised of how it's going, because I'll do what I can to share, because that's awesome. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Anything else? I mean, that's already a big enough medium term goal. But anything else that you sort of thought this would be awesome, like big goal. Yeah.
One of them is I want to do an adventure cycling trip again. So something like what I love doing is just having a small little backpack, really super small, where there's basically 2 tubes and a short and a t-shirt. That is what I brought with me. I didn't even have any other shoes. And then just ride across a country or half of a country. I love just having a goal and then really nothing else but myself and trying to reach that goal. And then being creative along the way, when you don't have shoes. So will you buy some, for example, from Walmart or so for €2, or, will you just ride everywhere? So there's a certain kind of, you always have to think of, it makes, when you're trying to deal with only minimum amount, it really makes you feel more alive, more creative, because you have to try to figure out how to solve the problems, and the small problems, but they're fun. It's fun. Yeah. So that's what I want to do. Then of course stage races like the Haute Route. Yeah. I'm thinking of doing the other ones. There are new ones added.
Yeah.
And then, there are so many other things which I might not know about.
Have you heard of the Transcontinental race?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds like a challenging one.
Yeah, but I was thinking about those ultra endurance races. And my problem with those races is the sleep deprivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I always thought about that as well, because I don't want to be riding, sleep deprived at 4 a.m. All kinds of things could go wrong, right?
Yeah, and that have been so.
Yeah. There was a death this year, wasn't there, or last year?
In all 3, in every single major race, there was a death, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I feel like with those races, it's not so much about cycling anymore. No question. I mean, it's a huge challenge, but it's also about like how much can you put yourself, your body through sleep, like a little sleep.
Yeah.
And I need like 8 hours, so I would be very poor performer.
Yeah.
So that's why I
agree.
keep it to 6.
that's for me. Is I have a friend who's done the transcontinental race a few times. He just talks about sleep. He just says, well, as soon as I feel a little bit sleepy, I go and have a 20-30 minute nap at the side of the road, kind of a thing. I've not tried it. I know, but I'm not sure it's for it's not something for everyone. Put it that way. But it's an amazing achievement. Clearly,
exactly. I would say a huge respect to those who are doing it. I mean, that is really chapeau.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, Monica. So I think we want to get close to wrapping, but I feel like I keep talking to you, so we maybe should have you come back at some point. But was there anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to?
I think we pretty much covered a good part of my life now.
That's awesome. I know it's quite. I'm sure people find it very inspiring. And well, I guess maybe one final thing is, like, if there are people who are listening to this and they want to make a change, they want to do something, and maybe it's not the kind of things that you did, but they've got something in the back of their mind. They've always, I would really like to try to do whatever. What would you say? How would you advise somebody like that?
What I'm always telling myself when I'm trying to figure out if I should do something or not, and I'm always telling Monica, if you were 90 years old, and I'm lying on my deathbed, and looking back at my life, is that decision, would that be something I would regret not doing or doing? Because I feel like sometimes it's the decisions we are making are actually in the, we maybe blow it up more than it actually is, because it's, it's right there in the present, but maybe it's actually a smaller one when we are looking at the grand scheme. It's also really about, like, I feel like, as long as you're following your heart, and as long as you are true to yourself and being real, what you, not anyone else, but you want to do, then you should do it.
Last, but certainly not least, is a clip from my conversation from episode 37 with artist, cyclist, and world record setter Andrei Goretz. Just in terms of how you approach anything, because it sounds like when you did this cruise ship thing, and then you had this, you saved money, and then did you have a plan in mind whenever you made these transitions from leaving the UK, studying, theater company? How these are all risks that you took. Yes. How did you approach each one in the same way, or did you kind of know what you were trying to do, or did you say, well, this would be nice? What was the?
I think that I don't know. So, for example, the ideas that I'm formulating now, I don't know where anything's going to go, and I think that's part of what is exciting about life, is not knowing, is the unknown, and I think that's what I thrive on. I thrive on the unknown, and I thrive on things that I just don't know, and I know that I have a certain number of tools, so I don't leap into things unconsciously or not thinking about them. I say, okay, these are the tools that I have. Can I do this? Can I reasonably, when I assess the risk, do I think that I have the ability to follow through on this? And then, of course, when it's something that you don't know about, you'll pick up certain tools along the way that will aid you in either succeeding or failing. But I don't mind failing. Yeah. You see, that's the thing. I think that, and I've heard this on your podcast before, fail your way to success. And that's really important, because I am interested in not so much in, definitely not monetary success. So when I do something, it's not for, I want to be the most successful, whatever. It's just about, I have to try this. These are the tools that I have. I don't know where this is going, but I'm just going to go ahead a certain amount of faith in myself that I can do this. You know,
and then even if it doesn't go completely your
That's
way,
okay.
You'll learn something, and
absolutely.
you pick up a few more tools, and
right. And it can also go in a different direction, in a direction that you didn't expect, because most of these things go in directions that we don't expect. So it's not having a definitive plan. It's not knowing exactly what the end product is supposed to look like. What am I hoping to get from this?
Yeah.
You know, they say, for example, when you do Race Across America, they ask you that one of the primary questions is, why are you doing this? You know, what is your objective? Why? And they say that unless you can answer that for yourself, you shouldn't attempt it. Well, I don't know that I can answer that. I don't know that I have the answers for that, so I would do it anyway. You know, it's something that I would try anyway, in spite of not knowing. And I think that's what's exciting. It's, you know.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm on the same page. I've not done anything like what you've done in terms of a world record attempt, but whenever. It was one of the things I really like about endurance sports is you doing a distance, and I'm hoping to do a challenge next year where you don't know if you're going to be able to finish. You don't know what's going to happen along the way. You don't know what your body's going to feel like, what challenges you're going to face, and that's what, exactly. That's what's exciting about it. That's what you learn something about yourself through that process. Whereas if it was all sort of, you know, regimented, and you knew that, well, if I kept this pace and took it in this much fluid and blah blah blah, then I'll be able to hit this time. To me, that's kind of boring.
Right.
Where you know that you can hit that time. So there's always something about it, about challenging yourself and putting yourself into the path of unknown and uncertainty that makes it. That makes
super exciting.
It gives. That's what life is. That's where discovery is. That's where the edge of anything is.
Yes.
And but what it sounds to me like is, it's for you, it's not entirely like just throwing caution to the wind, and you as you said, you've got tools that you're going into these challenges with, and things and strengths and things that you're weighing up.
Right. So I knew I was prepared physically. So that's all I can do. I know I'm prepared physically. I know relatively what I'm going to eat. You know, I've got my diet as clued in as I think I can get it. You know, I have my bikes. Everything is, you know, the logistics part of it, as much as you can figure out prior to doing something, I'll figure out. But there are other things that, they're just curveballs along the way that you just don't expect. You know, you don't expect to crash. You don't expect to fall asleep. You don't expect things to happen to you physically. And so, you know, with the cruise ship, I had no clue. It was petrifying. You know, at the time, I remember it was just a scary feeling. You know, in this tiny cabin where I was on the top bunk, and the ceiling is, you know, maybe 2 feet above. You know, so you can't sit up, and you basically can't stretch out.
What's interesting about the cruise ship is you're out at sea, so
nowhere to go.
It doesn't work out where you're going to go. It's not like I quit. You know. That's it. I hope you enjoyed our Best of 2017 episode. My apologies if your favorite clip or your favorite episode wasn't included. Believe me, this was a tough job pulling it all together. I had to leave so much out. I do understand. But as I said from the outset, it doesn't mean that any of those clips or excerpts or episodes that didn't make it are lesser in any capacity. I do appreciate and understand that we all take something different away from a long-form conversation. But you can go to allthingsrisk.co.uk and check out all of those full episodes and catch up on any that you may have missed. And you can also catch up on those that you may have missed from last year and find all the ways to subscribe to the show. I wish you all the best for 2018. I'm excited about the episodes we've got upcoming. I'm also determined to keep making the show and this whole All Things Risk concept better. There are a variety of things that I've wanted to do with the show for a while, but I haven't. And I'd love for you to continue with me on this journey. One of the things I've wanted to do is to make it easier for you to interact with me and the show. So do stay tuned for that. We'll be back soon. Until then, and as always, don't forget, risk is life.